It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. Craig, shut up.
Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
I'm Craig Price, professional bastard. Nice to meet you.
It's Reality Check with Craig Price. This week, Jan Carpman finds her way to the podcast to talk about her new book, Directional Sense, How to Find Your Way Around. Before we begin, let me get on my grandpa cranky pants for a second, and let me just remind some of the younger listeners how easy they've got it. Because when I was a kid, and you know when you hear that, it's going to start a rant. But when I was a kid, we had to buy maps to get to where we wanted to go. You didn't just get in your car, punch some buttons, and drive. You actually had to plan ahead, and you had to buy these big, oversized, flimsy books that would fall apart and pages would come out over time, and you had to figure out where you were before you could figure out where you were going. And then if you were colorblind, you were totally screwed. But just an FYI, those mile markers on the side of the road are there for a reason, and not just to tell AAA where your car broke down. You had to figure out how far away you were, where you were going, and then you had to figure out how many miles ahead before you took your exit. All these things before you got in the car. But you know, I digress. I'm going to take off my cranky pants now because with phones, GPS, cars that already come with GPS, getting to where you go is incredibly easy. That is if the GPS is up to date and there hasn't been any construction in a while and you don't want to get confused because the exit that you want to take exists, but people can still get right often. Technology can be intimidating, and if you're like me, waiting for my Garmin to satellite signal takes almost as much time as it does to get to where. So it can be frustrating, it can be irritating. But before we talk to Jan about me, I want to remind everyone that if you didn't find this podcast via the website, you can go to realitycheckpodcast.com and hear past episodes. You can do a nice search and find people by category. While you're there, you can sign up for the weekly newsletter, and you'll get it day of all our podcasts. It previews who's on the show and has a couple extras now and again. Also, feedback is always welcome, especially if you go to the iTunes site. The more reviews we have, the better our ranking. So if you can, please take some time to go to iTunes and leave a positive 5-star review. If you don't like the podcast, why are you listening now? And if you don't like it, just turn it off and forget we exist. But if you do like the show, please, please, please go to iTunes. We need the reviews. We need the 5 stars. It would really help us out. I'd really appreciate it. But also, you can email me directly at craig@speakercraigprice.com and let me know how things are going. Maybe you have a guest suggestion. Maybe you want some info on a past guest. Maybe you want to book me for an event. Even better. Or you can just leave a comment at the website, realitycheckpodcast.com. Last thing, you can hear our show on Stitcher. Stitcher allows you to listen to your favorite shows directly from your iPhone, your Android phone, your Kindle Fire, pretty much wherever you have Google Maps and all those good things on your iPhone that helps you get around, you can listen to the podcast too. It's on demand and on the go, anytime, anywhere, now even without Wi-Fi or cellular connection. I'm not sure how that works, but it sounds cool. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free at Stitcher.com or in the app stores. Stitcher Radio on demand. But that's enough housekeeping. Let's get going and talk to Jan Carpman.
The book talks about wayfinding, which sounds obvious, but also isn't something that a term that people use normally. Most people are directionally challenged. They can't navigate. They don't take directions well. No, I never hear anybody go, I lack wayfinding skills. Uh-huh. So where did the word wayfinding come from?
Wayfinding has been around for a long time. It was coined by a city planner named Kevin Lynch, who wrote a book in 1960. So it's been a long time. He was at MIT as a professor, and he wrote a book called Image of the City. And he was talking about how do people understand where they are in space and know where to go and recognize when they've gotten there and find their way back. And he called this wayfinding. And so that is the basis of what we look at. I am a wayfinding consultant. I work with large organizations like hospitals and museums and universities and even people who own parking garages to help people navigate. And then, as we'll talk, we have a new book called Directional Sense, How to Find Your Way Around, that's targeted to the people who need to be doing wayfinding and who may have difficulty doing so.
Well, is it these big facilities that you deal with, is it bad signage? Is it bad design? Is it just people just, once they're inside a building, with closing walls and doors and don't really navigate as well as outside? What is the big issue?
Well, there are lots of big issues, and that's one of the reasons why we end up with a lot of confusing places and people who are disoriented. We say that there are three elements that contribute to people's abilities to navigate. The first one has to do with design, and those are the things that you were starting to talk about, Craig. How is the building designed? Is it a place where people can tell where to go? Do they need signs to tell them? Is it a kind of building that's inherently confusing, like a building designed in a circle, where you keep walking and you keep walking and you keep walking and you can't tell where to go, or you can't see outside, so you can't tell where you are in relation to another place? So that would be an architectural issue about how a building is configured. An interior design issue would be, does the place you're looking for look like every place else? Is there no way to distinguish one place from another? So that could be done with color, with landmarks, with lighting, with all kinds of interior design features. So part of it has to do with interior design. Part of it has to do with signs and maps and the other things that we traditionally think of having to do, helping people find their way, and there are lots of ways that those can be designed well and not so well. So that would be the design piece of wayfinding. Then there's a piece that we call the operational piece, which is, what do big facilities call things? Do they use terminology that's confusing or mysterious to the people who are coming in? One example I like to cite is the term otorhinolaryngology.
Excuse me?
Yeah,
is that
otorhinolaryngology.
Hold on, let me think. Sounds like it has to do with something with the nose.
Uh-huh.
Is it an ear, nose, and throat person?
Ear, nose, and throat. That's what it would be.
Always go with the rhino.
Yeah. So that's an example of a term. If you saw it, it's even worse if you see it than if you hear it. So if you see this term, this long, confusing term on a sign, and you're not a medical person and you have never come into contact with this term, what does that mean to you? And then how does that make you feel that you don't know what it means? And, it kind of makes you feel stupid. And we don't want to make people feel stupid when we're all in the business of serving customers and trying to make these experiences customer friendly. So how, what places call their destinations, the information they give people in advance, how they update and maintain signs and maps, information that's available on the internet. Those are all pieces we would call operational. And those, again, can help people navigate more easily or make it harder. And the third leg of the stool, or the third element, is behavior. It's, what do people do? What do the users do who are coming to a facility? If you think about yourself, if you're coming into a facility for the very first time, and it's a big place, and you've never been there before, and you may be under some kind of stress, it's going to be confusing.
Is there something you're not telling me that I should be aware of? It makes it sound like I'm going to get committed. Have you been talking to my wife?
No. So it's a question of, how are people prepared? Do they have the skills to be able to find their way around? Can they understand signs, for example? Can they understand maps? If someone tells them directions, how well do they listen, and how well do they remember what they're told, and how well can they follow it? So those three elements, design and operations and behavior, all have to do with how we all navigate in what are a lot of big, confusing, unfamiliar places. And the situations that we are experiencing also can add stress and make it harder for us to navigate. For example, if you're finding something in an emergency, if you're taking your child to an emergency room, for example, everything kind of goes out the window, and it becomes much harder. So those are some reasons why this issue of wayfinding is a real important one in 21st century life.
And my guest today is Jan Carpman. She, along with Myron Grant, wrote Directional Sense, How to Find Your Way Around. And when we talk about people getting lost or the sense of direction, is it a nature versus nurture thing? Are some people just innately better at finding their way around? Is it something that you learn from? Because an example, my wife is awful at getting around, and she admits this. She grew up in Salt Lake City, and her entire life she spent in a valley, and on the east and the west side were mountains, but they were distinct mountains. On the east side were the Rocky Mountains, and they were tall, sharp mountains, and on the west side, I don't know the other range, but they're more of a lumpy, round one. So she could always tell east and west just by looking at the mountains. Where I grew up, so she's not very good when you take her out of that environment. We live in Houston, it's flat. It's hard to figure out where you are by looking at the land because it's all flat. Where I grew up in the Northeast, and everything kind of looks the same. We didn't have the luxury of mountains and things, so I just kind of learned how to wander around and find my way. And so, when we go someplace, I'm the map person, and I'm the one that finds it, and she is the one that figures out where we're going to eat. She's the Yelp reviewer. So is it a nature versus nurture thing, or can these be taught and learned?
Well, there are a lot of things that go into a person's ability to navigate. Some of those things are what you have at birth. There are some people who have what we call a sense of direction, which really means they can understand where they are in space in relation to other places in space. And some people can't do that very well. The second group, which may include your wife, we call directionally challenged people. But given that, knowing how to navigate, learning how to find your way around is still something that you have to learn. Even if you basically have good spatial skills, if you've never had anyone teach you how to use a map or how to follow directions or how to recognize landmarks, and you've never paid attention to it enough and practiced it and learned it yourself, you won't automatically be able to know how to find your way around. And by the same token, for people who have trouble with this, it is something that you can learn to be better at. And that's our book, Directional Sense, goes through these skills and talks about step by step how you learn how to do this. So it's a little bit of both. I think everybody has experienced getting lost, and everybody does experience getting lost all the time because places are big and confusing, and we're in a hurry, and we didn't have time to get the directions, or we didn't listen carefully, or something like this. But some people get lost more often than others, and those are directionally challenged people. And they experience the world quite differently, actually, from people who can navigate. For people perhaps like you who have a pretty good sense of direction, confusing layouts or signs that are inconsistent are kind of minor annoyances. You can figure it out. You can. But for somebody who's directionally challenged, these things are a major source of anxiety. And for somebody who's directionally challenged, to think about going to a new place, it can be really, really stressful. So that's a major reason why we wrote our book, was to provide information and tips and step-by-step information to people who are directionally challenged to help them learn this skill that other people seem to learn pretty automatically and easily, but nobody ever taught them.
As a society, are we getting better or worse? Because I have a feeling that we're getting worse because people become reliant on GPS, which is why they drive into lakes, because the lady on the voice said to turn left, and they did, and next thing you know, they're drowning. But they can Google map everything. They don't really take the time. So when you say how to learn to use a map, I'm not even sure they know how to have to do that because they have turn-by-turn navigation. Mm-hmm. So as a layman, I think we're getting worse. Is that something that's true, or is it just my perception?
Well, again, it depends. It depends on the individual. I think that the popularity of now certainly of GPS systems, and before that of the online mapping system like Google Maps and MapQuest, shows very clearly that this is a widespread issue. Even though people never might have said before, well, yeah, I kind of have trouble with directions, or I get anxious about finding my way. The popularity of these aids to navigation shows that this is a common problem that everybody has. But your point about the GPS is really an important one, and I think I'll tell you a story about that. One of the things I think that's fun about GPS is that people often feel so close to it that they name it. So I knew one group of people who called their GPS Francesca, and they said, will Francesca be mad if we go another way? And she'll say, recalculating.
They sound like they need to go on a date.
Yeah, that's right.
Some lonely people driving around with Francesca.
Right. So I knew a woman named Catherine who is very directionally challenged and who relies on her GPS. But one day she was on a trip with her kids, and they needed to go from their hotel outside Philadelphia to her aunt's home in New Jersey. And her son programmed the GPS, and off they went. It was a dark and stormy night, not the best driving conditions, but they were confident that the GPS would take them there because, they needed to rely on it, and it usually worked. So they approached a bridge. They noticed signs that said the bridge was closed. So they turned around and tried another route, confident that the GPS would work. But what did good old Francesca, the GPS, do? Recalculating, she said, and then led them back to the same closed bridge. They did this 4 times in the dark, in the rain, all to no avail. And now, of course, they were totally frustrated and late. So Catherine didn't know what else to do, so she put in another destination there. She drove back to her hotel and started again. So she remembered reading Directional Sense, which her kids had gotten her as a gift, and learning how maps could be helpful. And while she felt very intimidated by maps, the book explained how they give you the big picture. And she felt pretty desperate at this point and didn't want the trip to her aunt's to be a total fiasco. So she got a map at the hotel and asked the front desk clerk to highlight her route as Directional Sense suggested. She and her kids then could see there was another bridge they could take across the river. And although they were really late, this time they made it. And Catherine was inspired to take a look at a map before her next road trip, just in case Francesca, the GPS, lets her down again. So I think your question, Craig, about are we losing what skills we had or not learning them because of GPS? I think for some people the answer is yes, because it's easier. But the story shows that it's not enough. You really, because the GPS, for all kinds of reasons, can let you down, it's important to have other cues at your disposal. And it's not to say maps are perfect or signs are perfect or directions are perfect. They all have shortcomings. But what's important is to have multiple cues available and to know how to use them. So if one fails you, you can move to another one.
So if you're not comfortable reading a map and you are somewhat dependent on GPS, and you get lost on occasion, what kind of things can you teach yourself, start thinking about before you get in the car to make sure that you arrive at your destination? I mean, what are some of the coping skills that you have so you can counteract your own lack of direction?
Well, that's a good question. One of the important and I think widely known but not very often used skills has to do with landmarks. And landmarks people often think of as, oh yeah, I know the Empire State Building, or I know the Golden Gate Bridge, or the Hancock Building in Chicago. But landmarks can be really anything you want them to be, and they can be very helpful in helping you navigate if you have some information on the landmarks you should be looking for and some directions about how to get there. So landmark can be anything that is stable. That means it's going to be there on when you go and when you come back.
I'm definitely going to say that because I'm from New England, and you'll run into a guy at a gas station who'll say, head down the road a little bit, take a left at the old Wheeler place, and then go down this fire pit. You're going to pass a street. Don't go down there. That's not good. You keep going another mile and a half, and things will work, and you'll be right there at where the old barn used to be.
Exactly, and that's exactly right. Those are what we call local landmarks.
Well, that's not even local landmarks. That's so local it's only in his head because it's...
Well, sometimes local landmarks are well known, but if you come in as a new person, you wouldn't necessarily be able to recognize them, or certainly not know where something used to be, which is often what people say, because that the particular thing used to be a widely known landmark. So there are famous landmarks, there are local landmarks, and there are personal landmarks. So if you're driving down the street and you're on your way somewhere and you see something stable, as we said, memorable and unique. So it's not another McDonald's and there may be 12 of them, and not a gas station and there may be lots of them. But
or here in Houston, where there's a Starbucks across the street from a Starbucks.
Right.
And that's actually true. So if you go down one street and there's a Starbucks, and then across the street there's another Starbucks, and then if right around the corner from there is another Starbucks, you're going to get super confused.
Exactly. So the idea is to be observant and think what sticks out to me in this environment. And this also works beautifully inside as well as outside while you're walking. So you see something unusual. A good example, I have a street near where I live, which is otherwise kind of a boring long street, but along it is a mailbox shaped like a cow. And that is a great landmark because you notice it as you move in one direction, and then you go do your business and you come back and you can see it, of course, on the other side of the street this time when you come back. And then you know, okay, I couldn't tell the rest of this place. It all kind of looks the same, but there's that cow mailbox, and now I know I'm on the right track. So landmarks can be really helpful. That doesn't involve reading maps. It doesn't involve following signs. It's good if you don't necessarily speak the prevailing language. It's good if you can't even read. It's a great way for kids to find their way around. So it's quite useful, and it's fun. You can decide what your landmarks are going to be and make them up, and just as long as you remember what they are. So I think that's one thing that people can do that's quite useful.
Well, I also want you to either defend or destroy the stereotype that men never ask for directions because they know where they're going, and women can't seem to find where they're going. Is there a actual gender bias when it comes to getting lost?
There's been a lot of research on this, as you might realize, and it's a very politically touchy issue. Also,
sounds like a yes.
There apparently are some differences in the way men and women navigate. Men tend to be often big picture navigators and often like to use what we call cardinal directions, which are the north, south, east, and west. Women may use landmarks. They may use other means. It doesn't mean that in the end one gender is going to find the destination any easier or with more difficulty than the other, but they have different techniques. Many directionally challenged people, there are directionally challenged people of both genders. I think there is in our, at least in American society, a stereotype of men, knowing how to find the way and knowing directions, and women not so much, and some people play into this. But there are differences, and there certainly are stories on both sides. So I'll tell you a story about a guy named Jack, who was from Boston, who always used public transit, never did own a car. He's pretty directionally challenged, but after working through Directional Sense and learning how to use the map, he decided to take a leap and try to use the map during a business trip to New York City. He'd never done this before, and he'd gotten lost many times or had to ask directions repeatedly, and he always felt really dumb, which he certainly didn't like. Sometimes he took cabs instead of walking just because he didn't know how to go, and this is a pretty pricey solution to finding your way. This time he decided to do something different, and he actually looked at a map before walking to an appointment. From what he learned in Directional Sense, he could figure out where his hotel was on the map, and he was very excited about this. He said this really felt amazing. Then he looked for the address of the building where he was going, and he found its street, another triumph. And he could now see, he could, rather than just kind of being discombobulated from looking at a map, he toned down his stress and he just looked. And he could see the relationship of where he was starting and where he was going and what the route was that he needed. And he navigated by himself. He was holding the map, and he turned it the way the book told him to do, which means that you turn the map so that what's up on the map is forward in space. And he got there with no problem. He was really excited about this. And from reading Directional Sense and practicing what it taught him, Jack has confidence now that he can get from point A to point B by himself. He no longer feels directionally dumb. And as you're saying, as a man, he felt this was even worse. You know, he really didn't want to let anybody know that he couldn't, that he had so much trouble finding his way around because he just felt it wasn't very masculine. So whether or not that's true, obviously both, you know, there are lots of people with directional challenges, both men and women.
Well, I must do it the worst possible way, is because I ask directions when I get lost, and almost 99% of the time when I ask directions, we are literally within eyesight of it. And so I'll go, where is this location supposed to be? And then the guy will look at me like I'm an idiot and then point across the street.
Well, that's
like,
okay. You'll never see him again.
Well, I would much rather him go, well, you got to go 3 miles. But it's
right.
like, no, you can see it from the store. So it's I guess I just should wait long enough. No one ever says you need to go back to where you came from. You passed it. I never pass it. I don't see it ahead of time, because for me, I get the most anxious when I'm going someplace I've never been before.
Right.
Because I guess my brain can capture that information, but if I don't know where I'm going, it gets nervous. But once I capture it, I can find my way back. Is that a common trait for people who are, as far as going somewhere new, they get it's more easier to get off the beaten path, so to speak, because they just don't know what they're looking for?
Yes, of course, and that's true of everyone. People who are good at navigating and people who are directionally challenged. When you're going to a new place, it's always stressful. You don't exactly know how much time it's going to take. You don't know what the landmarks are going to be. I would have a hunch in situations like the ones you're talking about that the cues to tell you where you are may have been absent altogether. You might have been right near the street you needed, but maybe there was no sign. You know, so rather than feeling like, you know, it was your fault or you were dumb, the responsibility probably is on the people who were supposed to put the sign where it was supposed to be, or make the landmark clear, or show the entrance clearly, something like that. But I think another situation is that people become even more confused when they knew how to get someplace and when the place changes and they don't know that anymore. So I'll tell you an example of that. Maria had her mother in the hospital and was very worried about her mom, and they'd always gone to the same community hospital. They knew it really well, but over the years, while adding new buildings and new wings, it had morphed into a full-blown medical center. And now Maria no longer knew where anything was, and she felt unsure about finding her way during her mom's stay. On top of that, she is secretly directionally challenged, and changes to places that she once knew well, like this hospital, always throw her off her game. So sure enough, she got even more turned around than she thought she would. She couldn't figure out where to park. She didn't know where to enter. She took the wrong elevator. She ended up on the wrong floor. She didn't mention any of this to her mother, but her mother wondered why she seemed kind of out of sorts during her visits. So fortunately, her mom got better. Maria no longer needed to find her way around the medical center. But she felt bad about her inability to navigate and vowed to do something about it, did a little online searching, came across our book Directional Sense and read it eagerly and kind of trying to figure out what she could do about making her hospital visits less of a rat in a maze kind of experience. So sure enough, a few months after that, her dad had a heart attack, and back she went to the medical center. But this time, she knew what to do. Directional Sense taught her to do some wayfinding homework in advance. So she found out and wrote down which garage to park in, which entrance to use, which elevator to take, and how to retrace her steps. She also observed and wrote down the location of her car in the garage, which is often a problem. And she was grateful not to add wayfinding stress to her worries about her dad. So I think what you're saying there, Craig, is true. I think it's stressful to go to new places for sure. But it's kind of even more disorienting to go to a place where you think you know where everything is and find that it's completely changed. It's disorienting, I think, both literally and figuratively.
Well, one of the things I know that you really wanted to talk about was as we get older, the ability to find our way diminishes for some folks. So how does age play into wayfinding?
Well, if you think about what it takes to find your way, it involves vision, it involves hearing, it involves getting around and using energy, it involves remembering pieces of information. And if you think about that enough, you realize that as you get older, those are the things that change. Your vision diminishes, your hearing diminishes, your mobility diminishes to some degree, and your memory gets a little bit more challenged. So the basic skills that people use, the basic abilities that people have diminish with age, and that makes wayfinding more difficult. I think there are a couple other things that add to that. One is the issue we just talked about, which is that when places change, which they do over time, inevitably the grocery store is going to change its layout, and the new movie theater is going to turn into a megaplex, and the hospital's going to renovate. So there are places. The places now seem big and confusing. And then there's one more thing that also adds to the mix, I think, to make wayfinding challenging for older people, and that's technology. Now that we as a society are relying often on GPS, as we've talked about, and on the online mapping and using smartphones and using tablets, if older people don't use that technology, then they feel at a disadvantage, and they also feel intimidated by the presence of all that technology that supposedly helps, but it's too overwhelming for them to use. So I think all those things together can make navigation quite challenging and stressful for older people. And again, I think, sitting down and calmly thinking about it, going through our Directional Sense book, skill by skill, chapter by chapter, and working through that, I think can go a long way to helping older people either learn how to navigate if they never learned, if their skills are kind of rusty with lack of use, help them sharpen up their skills. I think for many older women who have been widowed, they may never, for whatever reason, have done the navigating in their lives. Their husbands may have always been the ones who drove. They sat in the driver's seat and may have held the instructions and called them out, but they didn't perhaps do as much navigating as their husbands did. And if their husbands have passed away, then the navigating falls to them. And so this becomes more of an issue for some people when they get older.
Well, this leaves me to the final question, the $1 million Wayfinder question. Where can people find your book? Obviously not at a bookstore, because there's not that many around anymore.
That's true.
But I'm sure they're at some. But where if people want more information, where can they find it?
They can find the book on our website, which is directionalsense.com, and there is a link on the website to amazon.com where the book can be purchased.
Well, I certainly appreciate you finding time for you to be on the show, and I think this is a situation, I think a lot of people have this issue, they just don't really want to talk about it, and so I think you bringing this to the front is very helpful, and I appreciate you being on the show today.
Well, thank you, Craig. It was a pleasure being a guest on your show.
That's our show for this week. Once again, I want to thank Jan Carpman for joining us. You can always find us on Facebook, our Reality Check podcast page. If you like it, you will be able to listen to the podcast right through your Facebook page every Tuesday, 7 a.m. It pops right up, ready to go. For Twitter, we're at Reality Check Pod. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.